40 in the School of Education, which is a wonderful building set up to be a demonstration site for technology and education back in 1992, the day I arrived, actually. So I came with this building. I kind of looked like a piece of the side of the building now, maybe, or something. I don't know. Anyhow, I think that this topic today is a critical topic because it bridges or links us from last week's discussion of behavioral theories and gets us into thinking about cognitive theories. But it's that intermediary ground between one set and another. It opens up the black box, if you will. And we're going to focus in on only one theorist this week as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5 that we did last week with behaviorism, which makes it much simpler. The other thing that's interesting or intriguing is that the researcher we're talking about today is still alive, as opposed to those from last week. The researcher we're talking about today is, in fact, someone who's on the board of directors for Indiana University and who's come here and spoken in this very room on a number of occasions. Once a year, he tends to give a talk for people here in Bloomington. In fact, the person today I once introduced as retired, and he's not retired. He had to promptly tap me on the shoulder and say, "Kurt, I'm not retired yet." The person today is a psychologist from Stanford who, born in Iowa, migrated down to the United States to make an impact. The person we're talking about today has many websites wrapped around his work and has won many honorary doctorates all around the world. The person we're talking about today has a number of books and famous studies that you may have seen or heard about. The person we're talking about today, we better get started talking about, or I'm going to run out of things to say. So let's switch over to the slides here for a second. And you can see that, in fact, this talk has been influenced by some of my colleagues, Joyce Alexander and Jonathan Plucker here at Indiana. We're going to talk about historical foundations of social cognitive theory, modeling, self-efficacy, definitions, concepts, and so forth. The person we're talking about today is none other than Albert Bandura, who's been at Stanford University for 50-odd years and has made a huge impact in psychology. He's one of the biggies, and one of the few remaining biggies still alive. Him and Jerome Bruner, I would list as 2 of the more famous, or most famous, psychologists still alive. Bandura born in 1925 in Alberta, Canada. Parents were Polish wheat farmers. He went to a small high school of 20 students with 2 teachers. Later went on to the University of British Columbia for his undergrad, and then the University of Iowa for his doctorate. After graduation, he went to Kansas, and the following year he accepted a post at Stanford. While at Iowa, Bandura became interested in behaviorism. And he had an early book, Adolescent Aggression, from 1959. Found behaviorism, however, to be limited in its applications. A popular theory, yes, he agreed, but limited in applicability to human learning. Yes, we can understand how cats moved through cages and how dogs became helpless, but could we really understand students and help them gain confidence and self-efficacy to learn better? Bandura quote here, have not been highly effective, learning theories in effect, have not been highly effective in accounting for the processes whereby social behavior is acquired and modified. Indeed, most prior applications of learning theory have suffered from the fact that they've relied heavily on a limited range of principles established on the behavior of studying animals or humans in one-person situations, not really understanding beyond that. In his second book, Social Learning and Personality Development, 1963. He was attracted to the work of Miller and Dollard as an alternative to the prevailing behaviorist views, which assume that people acquire competencies through new patterns of behavior through response consequences. He says, and I quote, "I could not imagine how a culture could transmit its language, its morals, and its complex competencies that are required to function effectively through this tedious trial and error process. It would take 3 or 4 lifetimes to master basic skills. In real life, of course, errors can maim and kill, so acquiring competencies through the effects of one's actions, stimulus response Skinnerian theory, has tremendous hazards." He states, "Learning would be exceedingly laborious, if not hazardous, if people had to rely solely on the effects of their actions to inform what they do. Fortunately, most human behavior is learned through observation of models. From observing others, one forms an idea of how new behaviors are performed, and on later occasions, this is coded information serves as a guide for your actions. It made sense to short-circuit the tedious, hazardous process by providing competent models. If you wanted to teach someone how to drive an automobile, you would give a competent model for how to do that. Trial and error learning would prove to be disastrous for the driver and the environment, anyone who might be hit. Educational practices should be gauged not only by the skills and knowledge they impart for present use, but also by what they do to children's beliefs about their capacities, which affects their approach behaviors in the future. Students develop a strong sense of self-efficacy when equipped to educate themselves, when they have to rely on their own initiative. In effect, what he's saying is, let's not just concern ourselves with behaviors, but on the models for those behaviors, and in turn, one's internal structures for how they feel about performing in that discipline, how they feel about their competencies, how self-efficacious they are for that. The learner can abstract a range of information from observing others, can make decisions about which behaviors to adopt and which ones to enact. Basic assumptions at Bandura's approach. More basic assumptions. Environmental influences on behavior are mediated by a variety of internal factors, what's called reciprocal determinism. It's not just the environment, but it's internal states that also impact on one's behaviors. Learning does not equal performance of the behavior. Instead, internal codes of behavior are learned and may or may not be used later. Components of learning. We've got a behavioral model. We got the consequences of behavior, but now we also have internal processes and perceived self-efficacy. So we've got cognitions which impact on our behavior, and we have perceptions or beliefs about one's capabilities, about one's performance. So behavioral models primarily function to transmit knowledge from the observer or to the observer. They are receptive learning, transmissive learning approaches. And we need to extend beyond that, okay? We need to get people, in effect, beyond just transmissive models, transmissive knowledge to the observer. And it's not just from a teacher, but mass media has an impact as well. Behavioral models strengthen or weaken a learner's existing restraints against performance of a repeated behavior. Repeated exposure to verbal and abusive authorities weakens restraints on the use of aggressive solutions. Some models are more effective than others. Some are more credible, some are more prestigious, some are more believable, some are more relevant. Social cognitive definition of learning is an internal mental process that may or may not be reflected in immediate behavioral change. So we've got a person, we've got an environment, and we've got behaviors within that environment. And that is known as a triadic reciprocity model of causality. We've got what's known as reciprocal determinism. So it's not just the environment doing something to a person. We've got reflections on our own behaviors. We've got our perceptions of our performance within that environment. We've got our behavior impacting on the environment. Again, not just the environment shaping us. there's a number of factors that come into play that in turn result in competent or not so competent performance. Bandura believed that chance encounters and fortuitous events could impact on someone. He stated some of life's changes were unexpected and unintended, and they could also be changed or influenced by unforeseen events. So unlike Skinner, who believed you can predict everything, Bandura did not buy into that. That some things are in fact unpredictable, and we don't always know the journey that we're on. Not everything can be shaped, as Watson said. We can't make everyone a lawyer, an accountant, an attorney, a nurse, or a teacher. That in fact we have some things that just happen that are unintended that shape what, in fact, the directions that we go. Learning does not need to occur through direct experience. Bandura believed that we can learn through vicarious experiences or learning from a model, learning from somebody who might have the expertise in an area, who might have some knowledge that can impact on us and have a bearing on us as we in turn learn something new. Okay? Observational learning was more effective than direct experience. A person would not have to go through trial and error. By watching another person, you can get corrected and see a correct result and see how behavior might be reinforced or not for their actions as opposed to your action. Less wasted efforts. And that's why, I guess, in turn, we see a lot of people relying on simulations, in effect, relying on simulations or other kinds of cases, scenarios, to see how people might try things out in a quasi-real-world environment, so that we don't stick teachers in a class of students right away until they've practiced on some virtual ones first. We might observe, tap into a classroom and observe through video how teachers teach more effectively, and use those as a training mechanism before we send teachers out into the field. Okay? So, person, cognition, attitudes, expectations. Self-efficacy is your belief that you can perform a certain act at a certain level of competence. First, we have attentional behaviors. We have attentional processes, I should say. We have to attend to a model. We have to attend to an event. We have to observe skilled behavior. We observe someone else performing in an environment. Okay? We observe those distinct acts, those activities. So we have attention that's paid, motivation behind those attentions, of course, and then the observation of an act of distinctive value. And later, we would rehearse those, practice those. Remember Ebbinghaus practicing those nonsense syllables. We would rehearse those over and over again until we got them the way we wanted, until we retain them. So retention indicates, part two, that we have a mind, that there's something going on here in our brains that is important, that Skinner and Pavlov and Watson and others didn't see as that important. Bandura's opened this up. We retain things, and we perform in our environment. Psychomotor skills, potentially, we perform that act, and we have to be motivated to produce it. Okay? That behavior. We have to believe one is capable of producing a particular behavior. So again, you have to have a model that you want to imitate. You observe your best friend bungee jumping, skydiving. You might try it out too. I, in turn, would not do that. You might see your brother or sister doing the chores year after year after year, washing the dishes or helping your mother around the house, and eventually you'll do that. Okay. So you see vicariously others being rewarded with a weekly allowance for taking out the garbage or cleaning the house, and eventually you will take that skill on. You also might be directly reinforced for helping your parents out, or your brothers or sisters or whatever, and have that money being given to you, or as a student raising your hand, and then having a teacher praise you for your answer after raising your hands or both hands up in the air, and then getting praise or reward from the teacher, and in turn, that behavior is repeated. In turn, you're being directly reinforced, and you'll try things out. So modeling. We've got modeling, which in effect opens up the black box, because we have to think about those models. And those models might not be physical human beings. It might be television coming to us electronically, or computer simulations coming into us digitally, or e-learning. It might be violence that we see on television, or on CDs that we buy of movies that are popular, okay? Social learning theory. Bandura believed that aggression must explain three aspects. First, how aggressive patterns of behavior are developed. Second, what provokes aggressive behaviors. And third, what determines whether the people are going to result or continue that aggressive act. And so he had these Bobo doll experiments at Stanford where kids would watch someone beating up on a Bobo clown doll. And then, he had these young kids at Stanford, boys and girls, and then he measured what would happen if you continually watch someone saying, sock them, hit them, kick them, pow, and then hit them with a mallet or something. And what he found was, that a lot of these kids, after watching it on through a glass window or seeing it directly, would in turn take on that behavior. They would start generalizing. He compared subjects who had been exposed to aggressive models and had reproduced a good deal of aggressive behavior resembling their models, with scores much higher in terms of aggression than control groups or non-aggressive subjects. So subjects who observed non-aggressive models, a subdued male sitting on a couch with a remote control, were less aggressive than those that watched aggressive ones. So he found that models are important, that when modeling, is rewarded, we tend to try that behavior out ourselves. So results showed that males in particular, more than females, were more aggressive from watching such behaviors, okay? This was consistent across children, across studies that he had done. The results showed that children who watched the video in which the person was rewarded for his actions duplicated the behavior more than when the person was punished. Conclusions. The results of the study showed as strong evidence that observing cues produced by the behavior of others is one effective means of eliciting certain forms of responses. And so, in effect, we can shape behavior through models. Bandura did a number of studies where variations were performed. The model was rewarded or punished in a variety of ways. The kids were rewarded for imitations. The model was changed to be less attractive, less prestigious, and so on, but he got the same results. Responding to criticism of the Bobo dolls that were hit. He even did a film of a young woman beating up a live clown. When the children went into the room, what did they find there but a live clown? They proceeded to hit the clown and punch him and kick him. So he tried the same experiment out in a number of ways, and many of you have heard of the Bobo doll experiment. In fact, in your course materials on the web, you have a video of the Bobo doll experiment, the original one. Somebody a few years ago was a cool resource provider in this class and found that Bobo doll experiment from 50-odd years ago and made it available. I didn't know it existed, and so it's been a great addition to the class, and you can take a look at that Bobo doll experiment, if you will. Okay. So effects of modeling. We learn new behaviors, we learn vocabulary, we could learn athletic performances. We also might get people to perform as groups in community actions, going along with the crowd, dancing on the streets, playing with toys. If we see models doing something, could be a ripple effect of emotions, laughing together, if you see others laugh, or cry. So we could also inhibit behaviors if you see someone being punished. Now, Bandura has extended his theory over time into self-efficacy, or beliefs about one's actions, as I mentioned earlier. He says that we have enactive mastery experiences where learners' previous successes at a task provide feedback on future performance. We learn by doing. We also have vicarious experiences where learners' observation of a role model attaining success at a task provides information on how we should do. So in effect, taking it another way, we have our own experiences, our own actions, doing, as well as the actions of others from which to learn from. Both, not just one. Enactive mastery experiences and vicarious experiences. We also have verbal persuasion, providing the learner with information about what he or she believes he or she is capable of doing. And we have physiological states or internal feelings from which to judge our ability to engage in an act. All four of those things impact on self-efficacy. Both the models of others, our actions, our persuasions, and the persuasions of others, and our physiological states combined. So we've got a variety of things that impact. We have consequences of our acts, vicarious consequences, watching how others are being reinforced in effect, watching how others are being punished, impacts on us. Self-imposed consequences must be consciously cultivated by the individual, setting our own standards for self-reinforcement, our own behavior. Creating our own consequences sets us apart from dogs and animals. It's no longer just the environment doing something to us or deciding on what our reward structures will be, but us in turn deciding on that. Enactive versus vicarious, well, behaviorist and social cognitive perspectives on enactive learning might be different, potentially. Are enactive and vicarious learning independent processes? How is Bandura different from Skinner or Watson? How are models providing more to the theory of behavioral learning? Think about that. Why are models effective? Models perceived to have high levels of skill with the observed behavior are deemed to be more effective. So when you've got the Michael Jordans of the world teaching you basketball, Tiger Woods teaching you golf, Peyton Manning and his brother Eli teaching you how to throw a football, Michael Phelps teaching you how to swim, when you have models that are more believable, then in fact you may take on that. If you have, for instance, Hillary Clinton talking to you about politics, about healthcare, she might be more believable than someone who's never been a politician. Okay. If you have Margaret Thatcher, for instance, talking about ruling in England and government there, again, you might find her more believable than someone who hasn't. Popular and well-respected models have greater influence than unpopular ones. Why are many invited speakers prestigious? Well, they have a book potentially. When you're asked to do a keynote talk, and I know this from experience, the more books you have behind your name, the more likely you're deemed to have expertise and are more respected because people have heard of your work. If a model is similar to the learner in age, sex, status, that person might be more likely to be imitated as well. So someone from your cohort, someone you can relate to, somebody who has examples that fit with you, someone who has examples that fit with your experiences. Self-modeling is the highest degree of perceived similarity. So therefore, videotaping your own teaching is one way of learning. We can learn from ourselves and our own actions. So watching yourself swing a golf club, or watching yourself throw a football, or give a speech, and then try to observe the negative aspects of your speech or things that you would do differently. I know personally, I don't like to watch myself, and I'm doing that right now as I deliver this. How do we use social cognitive theory? Well, we can use it in advertisement. We learn from models all the time on television. If we see someone drink a Budweiser beer, which is putrid, ugly beer, we might in turn drink that ourselves, but hopefully not. If we observe others in a classroom being rewarded for their particular behaviors, we might engage in those. If we see ourselves running, jumping, athletic skills being rewarded with gold medals, we might in turn go back home as a 5, 6, 7-year-old and swim harder and faster and longer the next day. We might see behavior in the home being reinforced. If you go to bed early, getting more potentially in allowance or whatever. The most common and pervasive examples are social learning theory situations on television commercials, watching TV and seeing what kind of shampoo people use again, or what kind of, and it used to be what kind of cigarettes people smoke, but we no longer allow cigarette advertisements on television. But that was always a cool thing to see who's smoking cool cigarettes or Marlboros or something else. Instructional implications, identifying appropriate models in the classroom, establishing the value of those models. What kind of behaviors will be reinforced as good behaviors and effective behaviors that are deemed worthwhile. Appropriate models might be the teacher, might be the student who's made the teacher assistant, might be older children that come in to mentor, or cross-class collaboration, might be a movie star on television or in a video, or a guest host. We have to establish what are those behaviors that are deemed valuable. And you might just ask your students for their models, for a list of their models, and why those particular models are valuable to them. You might teach them something about modeling and about self-reinforcement potentially. So instruction should establish an expectancy for positive outcomes to increase attention, teaching why we need to learn certain things and when to learn certain things. Complex physical skills should be taught using videotape models, potentially, so you can break those things down. In fact, there's a new video tool that's available today called Vidler. In Vidler, you have, like in YouTube, a video you watch and a set of comments below and ratings, but it also has a timeline, and you can write on the timeline a response about how, what you think about that video. So you can actually talk about performance. You can click on a segment and give feedback right at that specific second or moment. It's a very powerful one for teaching, and you might use it in your classes. Vidler, V-I-D-D-L-E-R. And in 2 years, when someone's watching this video, Vidler may no longer exist, but it's there today. So conceptual behavior must be enhanced when can be enhanced when modeling plus verbal instruction is carefully directed. Okay. Self-efficacy beliefs. Bandura proposed self-efficacy as a belief system that is casually related to behavior and outcomes. People make judgments about whether they have the capabilities to complete a task, beliefs to engage in the task. So a belief of one's capabilities to execute. Self-efficacy is content-related, often task-specific, and self-concept is global. So we have a task-specific self-efficacy, but we have self-concept, which is more global about how good we are as a learner or as an accountant or as a nurse or whatever. But we might have self-efficacy on doing a particular task, like as an accountant doing a budget or cash flow analyses or doing a revenue chart. 3 major outcomes, expectations. We have physical effects, pleasure or pain, social effects, approval, recognition, rejection, compensation, penalties, and self-evaluation, reactions to our own behaviors. More on self-efficacy comes from mastery experiences, our own successes and failures, vicarious experiences, other successes and failures, social persuasion, others telling us we can do it, and physiological cues, sweating and anxiety. various kinds of ways in which we learn whether we're good at something or not. Okay, learning from others being rewarded, learning from our own personal self-feedbacks, learning from high scores and so forth. So self-efficacy, high self-efficacy effort is strengthened in the face of difficulty. Typically leads to blaming lack of effort rather than luck or failure. Low self-efficacy, we might slacken our work, not do as much. Undermines the effective use of one's skills by directing attention to personal shortcomings. Always focusing on what we can't do as opposed to what we can do relates to lower self-efficacy. High self-efficacy, already acquired skills are intensified and strengthened in the face of difficulty. Effort and attention are focused on demands of the situation. Low self-efficacy, tasks must be given up altogether in the face of difficulties. Attention is focused on personal difficulties and deficiencies. Feedback based on the ability may only lead one not to put in effort because it is not needed. Plus, if one fails, one only assumes it is because lack of ability. Feedback based on effort is better, except that success with much effort implies low ability because it took you so long. But normally we want success being due to effort as well as ability. In fact, it's a combination thereof. Feedback based on strategy and adequacies are the best. The teacher can point out what strategy or procedure you applied that was wrong or flawed or wasn't quite right, and how you might fix that with a small change and in turn have a better performance. Development of reprehensible conduct. In human behavior by others, otherwise moral persons comes through a series of events which disengage the behavior from the self-evaluative personal reaction. Do not transform individuals overnight. Process is gradual, beginning with a performance of acts that do not lead to excessive self-censor. So, inhumane behavior by otherwise moral persons comes from a series of events which disengage the behavior from the self-evaluative. Discomfort is gradually diminished until brutal acts are committed with little distress. So in effect, I think what he's saying here is that we don't immediately turn to bad behavior, that it takes time, that models that we have in an environment that might be doing things that we don't approve of, we won't automatically take on those acts ourselves unless multiply exposed to that pattern of behavior over and over and over again. Well, Bandura's looked at these kinds of issues in a larger scale. He's looked at countries and how they've dealt with some of these issues in teaching literacy skills and teaching about AIDS and teaching about birth control. He's been in South America, Central America, and Africa using media, oftentimes using soap, these TV shows during the afternoons, soap operas, that can show a case of behavior that you want, whether it's learning how to read or write or maintaining some healthcare kinds of acts. So let's look at Mexico. Illiteracy in Mexico, the power of social modeling was used in Mexico through different means, including television, to alter attitudes, values, lifestyle patterns. Positive models depict beneficial lifestyles. Negative models portray detrimental ones. The transitional models are shown transforming their lives by discarding bad behaviors and adopting beneficial ones. So they modeled things to persuade the viewers to try things out in reading or writing. The actors in the learner roles were cast to represent different segments of the population that represented problems of illiteracy. Melodramatic embellishments and emotive music gave a dramatic intensity to the episodes to ensure high attentional involvement. Vicarious motivation in Mexico. Viewers were shown substantial benefits from self-education programs, both with high personal development and national efficacy and pride. So not only were people becoming more efficacious personally, but across the country of Mexico, there was more pride in terms of literacy. So it had a duplicative effect. In fact, Bandura will often just talk about not only personal self-efficacy, he'll talk about community self-efficacy, team self-efficacy, organizational self-efficacy. So their contrasted miserable lifestyles and transitional models were provided. So not only people who ended up in bad situations, but also good situations. The memorability of the events were important. Epilogues and summaries were provided to add symbolic meaning for memory, repetition, retention over time. So they learned those skills. So rate of enrollment in national literacy programs before the serial TV shows was almost 100,000, or not quite 100,000. After the TV shows, 840,000 a year. That is a significant impact of a theory. If you watch 8 times the benefits of previous, that's huge. In India, in Brazil, Mexico, Kenya, designed to bring down the population growth through family planning and address the role and the status of women in societies. Before the airing of dramatic series, the national increases in condom sales were 4%, after 23%. The percent increases in new contraceptive devices, 32% in Mexico, 58% in Kenya. The drop in birth rate, 34% in Mexico, 23% in Brazil. Again, huge, dramatic impacts from one theory. One person, Albert Bandura, has changed the world. You, in effect, can change the world, or a small piece of it too, someday. Tanzania, controlled experiment, serial dramas drawing upon principles of social psychology have been broadcast in countries such as Tanzania, where overpopulation and the spread of AIDS are severe problems. National AIDS Control Program distributed 32 million condoms in the region of Tanzania, receiving the broadcast, and only 2 million condoms in a controlled region that did not get the broadcast. Bandura concludes that serial dramas increase people's self-efficacy, leading them to take actions to help control the spread of AIDS. To compare changes in contraceptive use in broadcast areas that received the radio dramatic series with a large area that did not. Targeted family planning and sexual and drug injection practices that increased vulnerability to infection with AIDS virus. Radio series increased listeners' perceived self-efficacy that they could exercise control over their family planning. So radio, television, different forms of media are all effective ways in which to get change in behavior in a society. Frequent listeners expressed higher sense of efficacy than non-listeners. Frequent listeners increased both their perceived self-efficacy and adoption practices that prevent AIDS spreading. The more people listened to the broadcast, the more they talked with their friends and family and spouses about it. So, in effect, some final quotes here on this section. Bandura has chosen to swim against the mainstream of negativity in the profession in recent talks to the professional associations because, he said, our theories are grossly overpredict pathology. Let me just point out that hundreds of thousands of psychology studies have been conducted, but a scant percent, in the hundreds, have been on things like happiness. Happiness, where the state we should be looking to get towards, is not always something that psychologists tend to be concerned with. It's always about negative behaviors, not optimism, not personal growth, not human development, but it's often on the negative side of behaviors in life instead of taking control of one's life. Again, reciprocal determinism. You and the environment and your behaviors and the shaping of those behaviors internally and externally all impact on learning and what you're doing. So he's swimming up against society. For example, nicotine, alcohol, and drugs. Bandura says, in formal studies, formalized treatment programs, and research studies, professionals see the hardcore cases, the dreary relapse curves of these programs. And so we have all these theories about how every puff of cigarette affects the brain and claims that long-term addiction produces a brain disease. But 40 million people have quit smoking on their own. So you have to ask yourself, where is the brain disease and how did they uproot it single-handedly? A mass of success self-changers is the elephant that nobody sees. So 40 million people have changed. Or are we talking about, aren't we talking about the people who have taken control of their lives, and how can we help more such people do so? What he says is, if you look at theories of social psychology and then look at the dismal conditions in which children grow up in our ghettos, you would predict that all of them would be on drugs or in psychological basket cases, or be psychological basket cases. Yet, if you use criteria like gainful employment, forming partnerships without crime, community organization like Barack Obama, you would find that most of these kids can make it. Medicine is another area that negatively prevails. One conception of health emphasizes disease prevention, not health enhancement, he said, even though it is just as meaningful to speak of levels of variability, levels of vitality, as of degrees of impairment. So levels of vitality, he said, is the optimistic side of things as opposed to degrees of impairment, or the negative side of things. Which is it that you would rather have us pose or look at? Would you rather have us look at the negative things in our society or the positive things, right? Which is it that you think, in fact, are more important for us as a species? Evidence shows that exercising control over our healthy habits can help people live longer, can help slow down the aging process, can control our healthcare costs, can reduce healthcare costs if we're all healthy. He traces the roots of negative bias to prevailing theories of psychology and biology, which underestimate humans as active agents. Theorists saw the mind as a passive black box or a linear computer processing model, the SIP chapter, computer information processing. And he says it's more complex than that. Such theories treat people as automatons, I should say, undergoing actions devoid of any conscious regulation, phenomenological life or personal identity. It is the height of irony that a science of human functioning should strip people of their very capabilities that make them unique, that make them individually powerful to shape their own environments and make their own destinies. People are not just reactive products or selective or of selection pressure. Through their construction of even more complex environments, people are producers of new acts in new evolutionary processes. In the case of complex human behavior, nature operates as potentialist, not a determinist. As a society, we enjoy the benefits left by those before us, who collectively fought for reforms that improved the human condition. Our own collective efficacy will shape how future generations will live their lives. So like the book I'm listening to now, Caesar Augustus, he had a huge impact on us today. What people have done in the past, we should admit, are important, but we also control our acts to some degree and where we're headed. I think Bandura is the optimistic psychologist. We'll come to Piaget next, and Vygotsky, who I also see as the optimistic psychologist, and how psychology can have an impact, a beneficial one thereof, on human learning, human development, and performance, instead of looking at the negative side of life and how to shape bad consequences into good ones, how to get us to be good, moral, effective, successful human beings, genuine, caring, so forth. We'll get into humanistic psychology and other things later on. I think Bandura's whole premise here is, let's widen the scope, let's widen the lens of what's important in psychology. Let's look beyond just individual cues and conditioners of animals or individual human beings and their reinforcement histories to look at models in our environment that can have a potential powerfully rewarding impact in changing not just individuals but entire cultures, so as to make an impact on human learning, a healthcare condition, literacy rates, government, and potentially all of human life. In effect, we finally have something that speaks to us in general. I hope that you feel as rewarded from reading Bandura as I do. And this is one of the chapters where we have very little bit amount in the Driscoll book to read from. Just a few little pages, but look at all the content there. there's a wealth of information that could have been chapters and chapters and chapters in the Driscoll book, but it's not. And so we have to ask ourselves, why not? What could we have done differently in writing the Driscoll book that could have gotten us to this stage of understanding of the impact of Bandura and other social cognitive theorists and metacognitive theorists who extend this theory even further? So next time we'll talk about Piaget, Vygotsky, Brunner, and Gagne. I'll be back in a little bit with that part, and I hope you're enjoying the show. Thank you very much.